Welcome to this peaceful moment. Here, you will discover stories inspired by the quiet beauty of Japan. Each tale is like a soft breeze through a bamboo grove, carrying you away from the worries of the day. Imagine the scent of blooming cherry blossoms and the gentle flow of a nearby clear stream. Let these words and sounds cradle your mind in calm and serenity. Tonight, permit yourself to drift into a restful sleep. Let us begin this journey together. The rain on the roof tiles. The house on the hill. On the slope of a hill overlooking the village of Mizunara, there stood a weathered wooden house. Its roof, made of darkened ceramic tiles, had endured decades of sun, snow, and rain. In spring, moss grew between the tiles, painting them green. In autumn, the fallen leaves settled like a blanket upon them, before the rains washed everything clean again. It was in this house that Haru had spent most of his childhood, running barefoot across the wooden floors polished smooth by generations. He remembered lying awake at night while the rain tapped gently on the roof, the sound weaving a lullaby that only he seemed to understand. Years had passed. Haru was now 30, a schoolteacher in the nearby town, but he returned often to his family home to care for his aging father. The old man no longer tended the garden or repaired the roof as he once had. He simply sat on the veranda, gazing at the sky, as though waiting for something only he could see. And when the rain fell, Haru noticed. His father grew quiet not with sadness, but with a kind of reverence. "Listen," his father would whisper. "Every drop has a story. The roof keeps them for us." Haru had once laughed at this, but now, as the years pressed more heavily on both of them, he began to wonder if the old man was right. First rains. The first heavy rain of the season arrived one April evening. Dark clouds rolled down from the mountains, and the air turned cool. Haru sat with his father by the paper screen doors, watching as the world blurred into silver lines. The sound of the rain against the roof tiles was steady and layered, sometimes a delicate tapping, sometimes a rushing drumbeat. The gutters overflowed, water dripping in rhythmic patterns onto the stepping stones below. As the storm grew, Haru closed his eyes. The sound was not merely noise, it was a memory being stirred awake. He saw himself as a boy, kneeling beside his mother as she folded laundry, the rain outside echoing their silence. He heard the laughter of his sister, who had left for the city years ago and rarely returned. He remembered nights when his father told him stories about the river spirits, their voices hidden in the downpour. "Do you hear them, Haru?" his father asked softly, as if reading his mind. "Yes," Haru said, surprising himself with the honesty of the answer. The stranger in the rain. One evening in early summer, while walking back from town, Haru saw a woman standing by the roadside. She held no umbrella, though the rain was falling steadily, soaking her hair and kimono. "Are you all right?" he asked, stepping closer. The woman turned. Her eyes were clear, but her expression was unreadable, as if she belonged more to the rain than to the earth. "I was listening," she said. "To what?" "The roof tiles," she replied, glancing toward the village below. "Every roof sings differently in the rain." Haru found himself at a loss for words. The woman smiled faintly, then bowed and walked away, her figure dissolving into the curtain of water. When he returned home, he asked his father if he had ever known a woman who spoke like that. The old man shook his head, but his eyes glimmered with something like recognition. Summer memories. The rains that summer were relentless. The house smelled of damp wood and earth, and the sound of water was constant. Some nights the storm was so fierce that Haru feared the tiles would slide from the roof, yet each morning the house still stood, its moss darkened, its beams creaking but unbroken. Haru's father began telling him more stories, fragments of the past carried by the sound of rain. "When you were born," the old man said one night, "the rain was heavy. It struck the roof so hard that your mother laughed, saying the heavens themselves wanted to welcome you. That was the first time I knew rain could speak." Haru listened, wondering how much of the memory was truth and how much was shaped by nostalgia. Yet he found comfort in the idea that the rain had marked his arrival in the world. The woman returns. In late August, Haru saw the woman again. This time, she was standing at the entrance to the family's garden, her eyes fixed on the roof. "You came back," Haru said, startled. She nodded. "I wanted to hear this house again. Its voice is unlike the others." Haru invited her inside, offering tea. She introduced herself as Aki, a traveler with no clear destination. She said she had wandered from village to village, listening to the songs of rain on roofs, as though following a path only she could perceive. "Why?" Haru asked. "Because in every sound of rain, there are echoes of lives once lived. Roofs hold memories. I only listen." His father, who had been quiet, spoke up suddenly. "She's right. This roof remembers your mother." Haru froze. Aki lowered her eyes but said nothing. The room filled with the steady rhythm of rainfall, and for the first time, Haru wondered if the stranger and his father shared a knowledge he had not yet been allowed to touch. Autumn silence. As autumn arrived, the rains grew colder. The trees shed their leaves, which clung wetly to the roof tiles until the wind swept them away. Haru's father became weaker. He rarely left his futon, though he insisted on keeping the sliding doors open when it rained. Haru often sat beside him, feeling helpless, listening to the rain carry what words could not. One night, as thunder rolled in the distance, his father whispered, "When I am gone, remember this sound. It will hold me, just as it held your mother. You don't need monuments or graves. The roof is enough." Tears blurred Haru's vision. "Don't talk like that." But his father only smiled faintly, eyes half closed, as the rain's rhythm deepened around them. Winter passing. Snow came early that year. It lay thick upon the roof, muting the world into silence. Haru missed the rain, missed the voice of the tiles. His father passed away quietly in mid-December, during a still night when even the wind seemed to mourn. Haru sat alone, unable to cry, the silence pressing on him heavier than grief itself. And then, in the days that followed, the snow melted into steady rain. The sound of drops striking the roof returned like a heartbeat. For the first time since the funeral, Haru felt he could breathe. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I hear you." Return of spring. By spring, Aki returned. She found Haru repairing the roof, replacing a broken tile with hands that trembled but held steady. "You've taken the roof's song into yourself," she said quietly. Haru looked at her, realizing she was not merely a traveler. She was a keeper of echoes, a listener to the voices most people ignored. "Teach me," he said. "Teach me to hear as you do." Aki smiled, her face lit by the pale spring rain. "It's not about learning. It's about remembering. Every roof, every drop, is already speaking. All you must do is be still." The song continues. Years passed. Haru grew older, his hair touched with gray. Aki came and went like the rain itself, never staying long, yet always returning. Together, they listened to the voices carried by storms, the laughter of children long gone. The sorrow of lovers parted, the quiet strength of those who endured. Haru no longer feared loss. He had learned what his father had tried to teach, that nothing truly vanishes, not while the rain continues to fall. Not while the roof tiles still hold their echoes. Epilogue: The Eternal Rain. One evening, many years later, as twilight settled over Mizunara, a gentle rain began to fall. Haru sat on the veranda, his hands folded in his lap, listening. The sound on the roof was the same as it had been in his childhood, the same as on the day his father spoke his last words. The same as when Aki first appeared like a vision in the storm. He closed his eyes, and the voices came not in words, but in rhythms, in patterns, in memories that needed no language. The rain on the roof tiles sang, and Haru knew he was never alone. Footsteps in the bamboo shadow. The village by the bamboo grove. There was a village cradled between hills, where a vast grove of bamboo swayed like a sea of emerald. By day, the culms glittered beneath the sun, their leaves whispering in unison, 1,000 voices weaving one breath. By night, the stalks stood tall and silent, only the faintest rustle betraying the life within. The villagers said the grove had stood there since before memory, planted by monks who believed bamboo to be the ladder between earth and sky. A narrow path wound through the grove, its earth pressed flat by centuries of travelers, farmers, and wandering monks. Those who walked there often spoke of hearing footsteps behind them, soft as a shadow, though no one was seen. Some called them illusions, others spoke of spirits who guarded the path. In this village lived a young man named Riku, who had known the bamboo grove all his life. As a boy, he played among the towering stalks, chasing dragonflies and listening to the wind shift like a flute in their hollow stems. As he grew, the grove became his place of solitude, a refuge from the noise of the world. Yet the older he became, the more he began to hear the footsteps. At first faint, like the tap of rain on dry leaves, then closer, more distinct, always falling just behind his own. When he turned, the path was empty, stretching back into shadows. He never spoke of it. He feared that naming the sound aloud might give it power. The first encounter. It was a twilight evening when he first saw her. The grove was drenched in amber light, the shadows long, when the sound of footsteps came again, deliberate, steady, unmistakable. He turned swiftly, expecting at last to catch some trickster child, but instead he saw a girl. She stood a few paces away, her figure framed by the bamboo. She was about his age, with dark hair bound in a simple braid and eyes that glimmered like water beneath starlight. She wore plain robes of faded blue, as though she belonged to another time. "You walk heavily," she said with a faint smile. Riku blinked. "I heard you following me." "I was not following," she replied. "I was walking beside." Her words unsettled him, for there had been no one beside him. And yet, when he looked at her face, calm and luminous in the dim light, he felt no fear. "Who are you?" he asked. She tilted her head. "A shadow, perhaps. Or perhaps the echo of a step." Before he could ask more, she turned and slipped deeper into the bamboo. He tried to follow, but she moved lightly, almost without disturbing the earth, until she vanished entirely into the green dusk. Whispers of the elders. That night, unable to rest, Riku spoke to his grandmother, the oldest in the village. She sat by the hearth, spinning thread, her wrinkled face illuminated by firelight. "Grandmother," he began carefully, "have you ever heard of footsteps in the bamboo?" Her hands paused. She glanced at him, eyes sharp despite her years. "So, you have heard them. You mean it is true?" "The grove keeps memories," she said softly. "Every step taken there remains. Sometimes they surface. Sometimes they walk again. Some say they are spirits of those who never left the grove. Some say they are guardians." "Guardians?" She nodded. "In times of danger, the grove has protected the village. Fire has not consumed it, storms have bent but never broken it. We owe our lives. So do not mock what you hear there." Riku hesitated. What if the footsteps have a face? At this, his grandmother grew very still. "If you see one who walks in the bamboo shadow, you must listen carefully. They speak not to all, only to those chosen. Their words may guide or deceive. Be wary." Her voice was solemn, but her eyes glimmered as though she, too, remembered something not spoken aloud. The return of the girl. Days passed. Riku returned often to the grove, half dreading, half hoping to see her again. And one evening she returned, stepping out of the shadows as though she had been waiting. "You came back," he said. "I never left," she answered. "What do you mean? I am part of this path." When you walk it, you walk with me." Her words were riddles, yet her tone was kind. They walked together, their footsteps falling in rhythm. For the first time, Riku did not feel alone in the grove. He asked her name. "Akane," she said. It was a name like flame, but she carried it like a whisper. As the days grew into weeks, Riku met her often. Sometimes she appeared suddenly beside him, other times, he would hear her footsteps draw near before she emerged. They spoke of many things, of the bamboo's voices, of the clouds drifting like sails, of the sound of rain at night. Yet when he asked where she lived, she only smiled. "Here, in the shadow." The storm. One summer, a storm unlike any the village had known descended from the mountains. Winds roared like wild beasts, and rain lashed the earth. The villagers feared the bamboo grove would fall, that their shield against landslides and floods would be lost. Riku ran into the storm to see. The grove bent and groaned, the tall stalks swaying violently. Branches snapped, water churned down the path. Then he heard it, footsteps, many footsteps, rushing, pounding in unison. Through the sheets of rain, he glimpsed figures, countless figures, darting among the stalks, shadows of monks, farmers, children, women. They pressed their palms against the bamboo, holding them upright, their silhouettes merging with the stalks. And in the heart of it, he saw Akane. Her hair whipped loose, her robe clung to her form, but her face was serene. She raised her hands, and the bamboo around her seemed to draw strength, straightening against the wind. "Help us," she called, her voice both near and distant. Riku pressed his palms to a stalk. It shuddered beneath his touch, alive with force. He felt as though hundreds of hands pressed alongside his. Together they endured the storm until at last the winds relented, leaving the grove scarred but unbroken. The truth of Akane. After the storm, Akane did not appear for many days. Riku searched the grove, calling her name, but only echoes returned. Finally, one dusk, she stood once more on the path, her face pale. "You saw too much," she whispered. "What are you?" he demanded. "A spirit? A ghost?" "I am a memory," she said simply. "Long ago, I walked this grove as you do. But when my life ended, the bamboo remembered me. My footsteps remained. Now I walk still, but in shadow." Riku's chest ached. "Then you are bound here?" "Yes. As all who love this path too deeply are bound." She looked at him with sorrow. "And you, Riku, you hear me because you are becoming like me." Between two worlds. From then on, Riku lived in two worlds. By day, he taught children in the village, helped his grandmother, mended roofs, and lived as a man of flesh. But by twilight, he walked the grove, listening to Akane's voice, her laughter, her silences. He no longer feared the footsteps. They comforted him, like a companion always near. Yet he knew what his grandmother had warned. The more he listened, the closer he drifted to the shadow. "Why me?" he asked Akane one evening. "Because you hear," she said. "Many walk, but few listen. You hear what the bamboo carries, the weight of centuries, the songs of rain, the sorrow of partings. And because you listen, you cannot leave it behind. He longed to take her hand, but when he tried, his fingers met only cool air. The choice. Winter came, and with it, his grandmother's passing. She lay on her futon, her breath shallow, and whispered to him. The footsteps will call you, child. But remember, you belong first to the living. Do not let the shadow claim you too soon. Her eyes closed, and she was gone. That night, as snow dusted the bamboo, Riku heard Akane's voice more clearly than ever. She stood at the edge of the path, her eyes shining. "Stay with me," she pleaded. "You need not face the grief of the world. Here, there is only the song of the bamboo, eternal and gentle." Riku's heart tore. To walk with her forever, never to lose her again, was it not what he wished? And yet, the faces of his students, the warmth of the hearth, the voices of his people, all these called him too. He took a step toward her, then stopped. "I will walk with you," he said softly, "but only in the evenings. By day, I belong to the living. By night, I will remember." Akane's expression trembled between sorrow and joy. She nodded. "Then we shall walk in the twilight until the twilight becomes dawn." Epilogue. Footsteps in the shadow. Years passed. Riku grew older, his hair silvered, but he still walked the grove at dusk. The children of the village grew to know him as the teacher who wandered the bamboo. Some whispered he spoke to unseen companions. On nights of storm, when the bamboo groaned, villagers said they heard countless footsteps marching in unison, steadying the grove. They said Riku's footfalls could be heard among them, strong and sure. When at last his body lay at rest, the villagers mourned him. But those who walked the grove in the years after spoke of hearing two sets of footsteps. One light and quick, the other steady and calm, falling together in the shadow of the bamboo. And though no one saw them, some swore that if you listened long enough, you could hear laughter drifting like wind through the leaves. The silence of snow on the temple roof. Winter's arrival. The mountain temple stood alone on the ridge, where the cedar forests thinned and gave way to a clearing. From a distance, the tiled roof seemed to float above the trees, its curved edges gathering the first delicate snows of the season. The monks said the temple had been there for 600 years, built not for grandeur but for stillness. By late autumn, the air grew sharper. Frost crept along the mossy stones, and the pond beside the temple turned to a thin mirror of ice. Villagers from the valley below climbed the winding path less often once the snow began. The temple became an island of silence, visited only by wind and the occasional raven. It was then that Haru arrived. He was no monk, but a man who carried grief like a heavy robe. His wife had died in the early autumn, leaving him with only questions and emptiness. Unable to remain in the village with its memories and voices, he climbed to the temple seeking solitude or perhaps answers that he could not name. The abbot welcomed him without question. "If your heart is troubled, stay," the old man said simply. "Let the snow teach you what words cannot." The roof and its silence. The first great snow of the season came at dusk. Haru sat in the meditation hall, his breath fogging faintly in the chill. Outside, the wind dropped away. Snow fell in thick, silent sheets. It gathered on the temple roof, softening the ancient tiles, covering the world in white. He could hear nothing, no crows, no trees creaking, no footsteps. Only silence. It was not emptiness, but a fullness so complete that it pressed against his chest. The monks did not stir. They sat in meditation, backs straight, eyes half lowered. Haru tried to follow their stillness, but his mind thrashed with memory, the laughter of his wife, the fever that took her, the helplessness of watching. Against the great silence, his grief felt loud and unruly. When he could bear no more, he rose quietly and stepped outside. Snow fell on his shoulders, muffling even the sound of his breath. The roof above seemed immense, carrying the weight of centuries and storms, yet now blanketed in silence so pure it was unbearable. "Why does it not cry out?" he whispered, as if expecting the roof, the snow, or the night itself to answer. The abbot's lesson. The abbot found him there, standing motionless in the snow. The old man's robe was thin, yet he did not shiver. "You hear the silence," he said softly. "It is crushing," Haru admitted. "It reminds me of her absence. It feels like the world has ended." The abbot tilted his head toward the roof. "And yet, the roof does not break. It holds the snow. The silence is not absence, it is presence." Haru frowned. "Presence of what?" "Of everything," the abbot replied. "Every flake rests upon another. Every silence holds a sound within it, waiting. Listen not for what is gone, but for what remains." Haru looked up. Snowflakes spun slowly in the lantern light, vanishing as they touched the ground. The roof carried them without complaint. He tried to hear what the abbot meant, but all he could hear was the silence pressing more deeply into him. The woman in the snow. Days passed. Haru swept the temple paths, carried water, and sat in the meditation hall. Each night the snow deepened, and each night the silence grew. One evening, while fetching firewood, he saw her. A woman standing near the gate, her figure blurred by falling snow. His heart stumbled. Was it his wife? He stepped closer. The woman's face was pale, her eyes unreadable. She did not move, did not speak. The snow gathered in her hair as if she were part of the landscape itself. "Who are you?" he whispered, but when he blinked, she was gone. Only the snow remained, drifting silently onto the temple roof. He said nothing of this to the monks, fearing they would call it a trick of grief. Yet the vision stayed with him. Was she a ghost, or his memory given form? Or was the silence itself shaping a face he longed to see? The bell. At the heart of the temple stood the great bronze bell. It was rung only at year's end, when monks gathered to strike it 108 times, banishing human delusions. Haru found himself drawn to it one night. Snow had piled high around its wooden frame, and the bell itself was coated with frost. He touched its surface. The metal was bitterly cold. He lifted the striker and let it fall gently. The sound was low, resonant, rolling out into the snow-filled night. It seemed to stir the silence, not break it. The snow continued falling, undisturbed, but now the silence felt alive, carrying the bell's echo like a heartbeat beneath its stillness. As the sound faded, he thought he heard footsteps behind him, soft, measured, as though someone walked across the snow without sinking. He turned, but the courtyard was empty. The dream. That night, Haru dreamed of the roof. He saw himself lying upon its tiles, snow covering his body. He felt no cold, only the weight of countless flakes pressing him down. Beside him lay his wife, her face serene, her lips curved in the smile he remembered. She reached for his hand. "Do you see?" she whispered. "The snow is not silent. It is the sound of all things resting together." He tried to hold on to her hand, but it melted into snow. He woke with tears on his face. The fire and the choice. Late in winter, a storm came unlike any before. Snow fell heavily, then turned to sleet, pounding the roof. Wind roared, shaking the beams. The monks prayed the roof would hold. Haru rushed outside with them, lantern in hand. Icicles snapped, tiles groaned. It seemed the ancient roof would finally give way. During the storm, he thought he saw her again, the woman in the snow, standing on the far side of the courtyard. She raised her hand, not in farewell but in urging. He understood then. The silence of snow was not meant to crush him, but to teach him endurance, to hold grief as the roof held snow. Not to cast it away, but to bear it without breaking. He shouted into the storm, though no one heard, "I will carry it. I will hold it." The storm raged through the night, but when dawn came, the temple still stood. The roof bore the snow, and beneath it, Haru felt his own heart still intact. Spring's first light. When the thaw began, the silence changed. Snow slipped from the eaves in heavy sheets, striking the stones below. Water dripped, trickled, then ran in streams. Birds returned, breaking the hush with tentative songs. Haru sat on the steps, watching the snow vanish. The abbot came to sit beside him. "You see now," the old man said. "Silence does not last forever. Nor does sorrow. Both melt into the stream of life." Haru bowed. He would return to the village soon, to live again among voices and memories. But he knew he would never forget the silence of the snow. Nor what it had taught him, that grief could be held without being shattered, that silence could be full rather than empty. The last snow. Years later, when Haru was old and his hair as white as the snow he once feared, he returned to the temple. Winter had come again. He stood beneath the roof, now sagging with age but still strong. Snow fell gently, as if welcoming him back. He closed his eyes and listened. The silence was still there, vast, unbroken, eternal. But within it, he heard the echoes of everything he had lived: his wife's laughter, the voices of children, the creak of his home, the chant of monks, the toll of the bell. He smiled. The silence no longer crushed him. It embraced him. When the monks later found him, he was sitting peacefully, snow on his shoulders, his face serene. Above him, the roof bore its endless burden of white, silent and enduring, as it always had. Pine needles on the water's surface. The still pond. At the heart of the mountain village lay a pond so calm that it often appeared like a mirror polished by unseen hands. Its surface reflected the clouds in summer, the moon in autumn, the bare branches in winter, and the soft blossoms in spring. Yet what gave the pond its quiet beauty throughout the year were the pine needles. From the grove above, tall and weathered pines stood in silence, their green crowns swaying in the high wind. When the air grew restless, they released their slender needles, which drifted downward like fragments of thought, settling gently on the water's surface. There they floated, gathering, scattering, drifting as the breeze commanded. A young man named Haru frequently visited the pond. To the villagers, it was merely a body of water that had been used long ago for irrigation. But to Haru, it was a place where silence deepened, where the world spoke without words. Haru's restlessness. Haru was not a monk, nor a scholar, nor anyone special. He was a carpenter's son who found little peace in the clamor of hammers and saws. Though skilled with his hands, his heart remained unsettled. Each evening, after his work was done, he walked to the pond and sat on a weathered stone near the edge. He watched the pine needles gather in clusters, shift, then scatter apart again, carried by the subtlest ripples. One evening, his grandfather, an old man with a back bent like a bow, came with him. They sat together as the evening air cooled and the cicadas' chorus softened. "Why do you sit here so often, Haru?" his grandfather asked. Haru lowered his gaze to the water. "Because I don't know what else to do. My mind is restless, and yet here when I watch the pond, I feel it quiet a little." The old man nodded. The pine does not choose where its needles fall. The pond does not cling to what lands upon it. Perhaps that is the way. The Fisherman's Tale. One autumn day, as Haru sat at the pond, a fisherman from the village passed by. He set down his basket and crouched beside Haru. "You come here often," the fisherman said with a smile. "Do you know the story of this pond?" Haru shook his head. "Long ago," the fisherman began, "a monk built his hut nearby. He spent his days in meditation, and each evening he came here to wash his hands. One night, he saw pine needles floating on the water and realized thoughts are like these needles. They fall without end, but the pond does not struggle. It accepts them. So he sat here until he passed away, his heart as calm as this water." The fisherman rose, adjusted his basket, and walked on. Haru stared at the pond again. Pine needles had gathered near the stone where he sat. The tale lingered in his mind, and for the first time, He began to understand why he had always been drawn here. The storm. Winter came with sudden ferocity. One night, a storm tore across the mountains, bending trees and breaking branches. Haru lay awake in his small room, listening to the howl of the wind and the groan of the pines above the village. He thought of the pond and wondered if its surface could survive such violence. The next morning, he rushed to see it. The pond was littered with pine needles, broken twigs, and fragments of bark. The water no longer mirrored the sky but carried the storm's scars. Haru felt a pang of grief, as though something sacred had been violated. As he stood there, his grandfather appeared at his side, walking slowly with his cane. "Do not be troubled," the old man said. "The pond does not resist the storm. It receives what comes. In time, the wind will calm, and the water will clear. Can you not learn the same?" Haru clenched his fists. "But I don't want to be weak, like the pond that cannot fight back." His grandfather shook his head. "It is not weakness. To endure without resentment is a strength greater than resistance." The winter silence. Snow began to fall, covering the world in silence. The pond froze around its edges, and the pine needles lay trapped beneath thin sheets of ice. Haru continued to visit, though now his footsteps crunched over snow and his breath hung in the air. He sat and watched the stillness. Sometimes he imagined the monk from the Fisherman's Tale sitting beside him, hands folded, eyes calm. Seeing not the storm nor the ice but the eternal rhythm beneath. One afternoon, as the snow fell thick, Haru closed his eyes and listened. The silence of the pond entered him, and for a moment, his restless thoughts slowed. It was not peace in the grand sense, but a pause, a single breath where the weight of the world felt lighter. The spring thaw. When spring arrived, the snow melted and the pond returned to life. Frogs croaked at dusk, dragonflies hovered above the reeds, and blossoms from a distant cherry tree floated to mingle with the pine needles. Haru, now a little older in spirit, noticed details he had once overlooked: the pattern of ripples when a breeze touched the surface. The slow journey of a single needle from one side of the pond to the other, the way the water reflected both sky and earth in equal measure. One evening, he whispered aloud, "Perhaps I am like these needles, falling without knowing why, yet finding a place to rest." The grandfather's passing. That summer, Haru's grandfather grew weaker. He lay in bed, his breath shallow, his voice faint. Haru sat beside him, holding his hand. "Do not grieve," the old man said. "Life is like the pine's gift to the pond. When it ends, it falls gently, becoming part of the stillness. Watch the pond, Haru. It will teach you what I cannot." Not long after, his grandfather passed away, his face peaceful, as though he too had become part of the silence. Haru returned to the pond often, carrying both sorrow and gratitude. He saw in the drifting needles a reflection of life's impermanence, yet also its beauty. The endless drift. Years later, Haru became a carpenter like his father. His hands built homes, repaired bridges, and shaped beams that would outlast him. But no matter how busy he became, he always returned to the pond. On its surface, pine needles continued to fall. They floated for a while, then sank or drifted away. Each one is unique, yet all are part of the same quiet cycle. Haru no longer came seeking answers. He came simply to sit, to breathe, to let his thoughts drift like the needles. He had learned that peace was not the absence of restlessness, but the ability to hold it gently, as the pond held the pine. And so the pond remained, season after season, a mirror of the sky, a keeper of silence, a teacher for those who listened. The morning mist over the rice fields. The village in the mist. At the edge of the valley, where mountains bowed low to let a river slip through, there lay a small village. Its houses were built of wood and thatch, clustered like birds at rest. Beyond them stretched rice fields, wide and shimmering, their neat rows curving like brushstrokes upon the earth. Each morning, before the sun had risen high enough to burn away the dew, a pale mist would gather. It rose from the damp earth and clung to the stalks of rice, winding itself into the air like unspoken breath. To the villagers, this mist was nothing unusual. It was the valley's veil, a companion as constant as the seasons themselves. Yet to one youth named Akio, it was something more. Akio had grown with the rice, season after season, his hands already hardened by the sickle and the plow, though he had only just become a man. He had lived all his life in the shadow of the mountains, and yet his heart was never content. The mist seemed to whisper to him each morning, carrying with it secrets he could not quite hear. The weight of expectations. Akio's father was a farmer, as his father had been before him. The rice fields were not merely land but lifeblood, the measure of survival. From planting in the spring to harvest in the autumn, every gesture of the family's life revolved around the fields. Yet Akio often found his gaze wandering beyond the boundaries of their land. While others bent their backs in the flooded paddies, he would pause, leaning on his hoe, staring at the mist. His father noticed, and his voice was heavy with disapproval. "Akio," he said one morning, his hands deep in mud, "the rice waits for no dream. The stalks do not grow by staring. They demand sweat." Akio bowed his head and returned to work, but in his heart, he felt the weight of a question: was life only this endless rhythm of toil? The elders spoke of duty. The fields fed the village, and the village sustained the people. It was a circle, unbroken for generations. To disrupt it was unthinkable. And yet Akio could not silence the tug within him, the voice that rose with the morning mist, asking for more. The stranger in the mist. One early morning, when the fields still shimmered with dew and the mist lay heavy across the earth, Akio lingered at the edge of the water. The sky had only just begun to pale, and silence held the valley. Then, through the haze, he saw a figure. It was an old man, cloaked in robes that seemed worn by many journeys. He carried a staff, and his beard fell in silver strands to his chest. He walked as though the earth itself carried him, his steps soundless upon the embankments. Akio approached with caution. The village rarely saw travelers, and never at such an hour. "Good morning, honored elder," Akio said, bowing slightly. "Are you lost?" The old man smiled, his eyes crinkling like folded paper. "Lost? No. I follow the mist, and it has brought me here." Akio frowned. "The mist?" The man nodded. "Yes. It is the breath of the earth, rising to greet the sky. To most, it is but vapor. But to some, it is a path." Akio felt a stirring in his chest. He wanted to ask what path the man meant, but before he could, his father's voice carried from the fields, calling him back to work. When Akio turned again, the old man had already vanished into the mist, leaving only the sound of water dripping from the stalks. The season turns. Summer deepened. The fields turned greener, their stalks thick with promise. Cicadas sang in the trees, their voices endless. Work grew heavier, and Akio's body ached each night. But his mind was restless. He thought of the old man often, of the words spoken about the mist. Sometimes, in the quiet before dawn, he thought he saw that figure again, drifting across the fields. Once, when he followed, he found only emptiness, save for a crane lifting from the water with slow, deliberate wings. The harvest came, and with it, the festival. The villagers gathered beneath lanterns, drums echoing through the valley, and sake poured freely. Akio's father drank with pride, praising the bounty of the rice. Yet even amid the laughter and music, Akio felt apart. He looked toward the mountains, their silhouettes hidden in mist, and wondered what lay beyond them. The journey begins. The morning after the festival, Akio awoke before dawn. The village still slept, its houses dark and quiet. He slipped from his home, carrying nothing but a small satchel. His heart pounded with both fear and excitement. The mist lay thick over the rice fields, as though waiting for him. He followed the narrow path between paddies, his feet damp with dew. For the first time, he did not turn back when his father's voice called in memory. As he walked, the mist thickened, swallowing the familiar. Soon, he could no longer see the village, nor the path beneath him. He pressed on, guided only by the memory of the old man's words, "The mist is a path." Hours passed, or perhaps only moments. Time felt strange within the fog. And then, suddenly, the mist parted. Before him lay a forest, its trees tall and solemn, their trunks like pillars. Birds stirred in the branches, and the air smelled of pine and earth. Akio stepped forward. His journey had begun. Lessons in the forest. Days turned into weeks. Akio wandered through valleys and forests, across rivers and over ridges. He learned to listen to the world around him, the rustle of leaves, the calls of unseen animals, the rhythm of his breath. One evening, he stumbled upon a small hut where the old man he had first seen in the mist was waiting. It was as if the elder had known all along that Akio would come. "You followed, as I knew you would," the old man said. "Who are you?" Akio asked. "A traveler. A keeper of paths. Some call me a monk, others a hermit. I am neither and both." Akio sat before him, and the old man poured tea. Its steam curled upward, mingling with the faint mist that still lingered in the valley. "You seek more than the rice fields," the elder said. "But know this: to seek beyond does not mean to abandon what is behind. The fields remain, as do your people. Your path must honor both." Akio bowed his head. "Then what is my path?" The old man smiled. "Walk. Listen. Learn. The mist will show you." The return of the mist. Years passed. Akio traveled far, to towns bustling with markets, to temples where bells tolled at dawn, to mountains where snow lay heavy even in summer. He met teachers who spoke of impermanence, poets who captured beauty in a single breath, and farmers whose lives reminded him of his father's steady hands. But always, in the quiet moments, he thought of the rice fields and the morning mist. One spring, as the swallows returned, he felt a pull within him. His journey had not ended, but it had turned. He walked the long road back to his valley, his satchel now worn, his shoulders stronger, his eyes gentler. When he arrived, the village was unchanged. Children laughed in the fields, women sang as they planted, and his father, older now, slower in movement, still bent to the earth. Akio stood at the edge of the rice fields, watching the mist rise once more. His father approached, silent for a long while. Then, softly, he said, "You left as a boy. You return as something else." Akio bowed deeply. "I return as your son." The endless mist. From then on, Akio worked beside his father again, his hands sinking into the mud, his body moving with the rhythm of the seasons. But within him, something had changed. He no longer saw the mist as a veil or an escape. He saw it as the breath of life itself, binding mountain and valley, earth and sky, father and son. It was not a path away from home, but a reminder that every path, no matter how far, circles back. On mornings when the mist was thick, villagers would see Akio standing at the edge of the fields, his figure blurred in the pale light. Some said he looked like the hermit who had once walked those paths, a figure out of legend. Akio never corrected them. He simply smiled, and when asked what he saw, he answered quietly, "The world, beginning again." And so the mist rose each morning, endless and eternal, carrying whispers of journeys past and yet to come, veiling and revealing in equal measure.